Right. We are on live. Good morning, people of God. Good morning, family of faith. Friendship West. We are, man, super excited. This is a great day. First of all, it's Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth to everybody. We are excited. There's a lot of stuff going on across the country, across the city, across the country as we celebrate today and its significance. But this morning, we are continuing the work that Friendship West does, the way that we're doing what God has called us to do, blessed us to do. I'm excited to be joined this morning by Kiara Haynes, representing the Tribe Young Adult Ministry, our pastor for justice at Friendship West, the incomparable Danielle Ayers. We're going to hear from our keynote speaker this morning, Mercedes Fulbright, in a little bit. But if you don't know, I'm David Malcolm Magruder, pastor for youth and collegiate ministries at Friendship West. Let's just start with a quick word of prayer, of centering. Gracious God, dear Spirit, we give you thanks for this moment, for the privilege that we have to attune ourselves to your frequency, to attach ourselves to what you are up to. Your word is very clear that justice and righteousness are your mandate. This day and every day, we pray that you would grace us with insight and clarity as to what we are to do. As the people of God asked the prophet, what does the Lord require of us? To do justice, help us to do these things. To love mercy, help us to accomplish it. And to walk humbly with you and each other each and every day. For our time, we pray your choicest blessings. Amen.
Amen.
All right, y'all. So let me just kind of start by framing the conversation, because it's going to be an awesome. I'm excited about what we're doing today. So this conversation is a product of some conversations that have already been happening organically within Friendship West, our youth community, our young adult community, in light of both the COVID-19 crisis as well as the crisis of racism and the crisis of oppression and injustice that we have been experiencing. And so a lot of young people were asking, well, Pastor, what do we do? You know, what do I do? And I thought that was an amazing question coming from our young people, because it really challenged me. I had my answer, but I wanted to make sure that I was giving them something that they could, you know, really rest on and lunch on. And so part of what we want to do is, number one, really remind our young people about the work that's already going on at Friendship West and remind them to anchor themselves, right, in the work that we are already doing on a consistent basis at Friendship West. But then more plainly, to help them and ourselves understand, both our youth and our young adults, how we can anchor this moment and produce a movement that goes beyond the moment. So as we see people in the streets that are protesting, we're excited about that, but we want to know what we can do to position ourselves to raise our voices, to raise the voices of others against injustice and against oppression of all kinds. And so today, I just want to offer this opening statement before I turn it over to Kiara Haynes for who's going to carry us the rest of the way. But as we celebrate Juneteenth and the promise of democracy that was given to our ancestors, we also celebrate and remember the price that our ancestors paid for the promise of democracy. And the popular narrative of Black and African-American progress has for many years centered the Black church and its personalities, its popular pulpits, its pivotal moments, and its sainted efforts to, in the words of Dr. King, to redeem the soul of America. But that narrative has also been a narrative that marginalized the stories and the efforts of warrior ancestors whose names we may never know. It has been a narrative that has also canceled out, quieted, undermined the roles and the contributions of Septima Clark, of Fannie Lou Hamer, of Ella Baker. It's a movement that privileges and highlights Huey Newton and Stokely Carmichael, but folks don't really know about the tremendous work of Elaine Brown. It's a movement that, if we're honest, has been ashamed of the contributions of its LGBT brothers and sisters, like James Baldwin, right, and Audre Lorde, and Bayard Rustin. It's a movement that has been primarily bourgeois, right, that has attempted to speak on behalf of the poor and the working class. And so I'm excited about today because it represents, I think, what is happening in our world more broadly. We're seeing a new generation of young people. We're seeing a new generation of young leadership in the streets, and they are leading on issues related to fundamental issues related to freedom and to justice. They are overwhelmingly young. They are overwhelmingly women. Some of them are queer. They are multiracial. They are working class and poor. They are of various abilities, but most importantly, they are radical in their call for fundamental change. And so on this day of celebration of Black freedom, I want to challenge us as the church, as young people, as young adults who believe in the substance of things hoped for and in the evidence of things that we cannot see, to this day commit ourselves again to a faith, to a theology, and to a witness that affirms the life of all Black people. And I think that's important for us today as we center this work that this amazing church has done, that we're going to continue to do with you, with your help. And so today is about equipping folks with the skills, the resources that they need to do that work and to build those movements. But as we do that, let us do that with a spirit of humility, right? As the church, let us attempt to atone for our silence and for our complicity, right? In the murders of members of our trans community who are Black. May we repent for the sins of sexism and for the sins of misogyny. May we repent, right, for our complicity and our silence around the oppression of the LGBT community. May we repent for the blasphemy of prosperity gospel, right? And it's our allegiance to exploitative capitalism. May we repent for our internalization of imperialist structures and imperialist formations of all kinds, for our colonized visions of Christianity, for our failure to connect our local issues to more global concerns. As we celebrate freedom, Black freedom today, may we celebrate a new Black freedom that is truly freedom and liberty and justice for all. So that's what I wanted to say as we kick off this amazing conversation. Where do we go from here? Talking about young people in 21st century movement building. Kiara, the floor is yours. Talk to us.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. McGruder. I'm excited to have this dialogue on the issues of racial justice, of law enforcement reform, particularly for my generation, those that look just like me in my age group, right? Brianna, Ahmad, and Rashad, 26, 27, right? All millennials, right? And then Gen Z, as we're seeing now in the movements, now becoming more engaged as well. And so I'm just so excited to have this dialogue with both of you all. But more so, how do we make a new world a more just world, and to make sure that that's our new normal, right? So please let me not labor the time. I want to introduce our first keynote speaker, the Reverend Danielle Ayers. Amen, amen. She is a justice seeker, author, preacher, and teacher. Currently, she serves as the pastor of justice at Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. Under the leadership of Reverend Dr. Frederick D. Haynes III, Reverend Ayers provides leadership to the following impact areas: economic justice, food justice, gender justice, environmental justice, legal justice, racial reconciliation, voter engagement, and immigration. She also leads the church's public policy and justice initiatives through education, mobilization, and organization. As a consultant, she facilitates sessions at churches across the country, offering effective tools to decolonize mission trips and construct justice ministries. Reverend Ayers serves as the co-convener of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference and as a delegate to the Transatlantic Roundtable on Religion and Race. She serves on the President Jimmy Carter's New Baptist Covenant Board of Directors and the Board of Directors of the Faith Cooperative Federal Credit Union. Reverend Ayers holds a Bachelor of Business Administration in Marketing and Economics from the University of Memphis and a Master's of Divinity from Bright Divinity School. Reverend Ayers is the co-author of the To Serve This Present Age Social Justice Ministries in the Black Church and member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I would like to first ask you, can you inform us briefly of some of the campaigns, actions, initiatives of justice that Friendship West is currently leading?
Thank you so much. First of all, to Reverend Magruder, Pastor Magruder, for the invitation, and to Kiara for that lengthy introduction. So I think what I want to do is really anchor this. I will talk about some of the current issues, initiatives where people can plug in and be a part of Friendship West. But I also think, for me at least, it's always still in this moment, while Reverend Magruder opened us up in the Sankofa moment, and we're reminded today about Juneteenth and what that means. I want to do just a quick talk about, highlight some historical moments in the life of the Black church that I think can continue to inform how we move forward. It is, and I just thought about this week, where Magruder was talking about the youth, the young people, and Kira, you're young, you're involved in the movement. You're talking about, those who have been primarily, who have this week, these past few weeks, who have been killed by state-sanctioned violence, young people, right? And I think it's so important to continue to emphasize that most of the movements, even as we think about historically from the church perspective, has been led by young people, right? And we keep forgetting Dr. King was 26 years old when he, led the Montgomery movement. So, and I think about this past week, we just, commemorated, the uprising in Soweto by the young people. And it's spread throughout the country. So I think it's important to keep this as a transgenerational conversation, transgenerational movement, because we all have our place in it, and that shifts as we get older, right? I feel like it's always the young people's energy that keeps me going, right? But I also think then it's that the wisdom of the elders is also critical and important to the work as well. So for me, when I think about the work that we do at Friendship West, I see it as a continuum of what our ancestors understood about God, and by extension, how they saw God working in the world. And for me, at least, as I look back and do this work every day, and I always have my own Sankofa moment of looking back, we understand that for Black folks in particular, that that being Black is a pre-existing condition in this nation, right? And that we're always engaged in a radical call for social change. So historically, then, the church has served yes, as an anchor institution and lifeline to the community historically. And so we look back, if you look at during enslavement, the Black church spoke to the humanity of the people by lifting Jesus as a liberator, right? No separation of body and soul. It wasn't a white Christianized view of who Jesus was. And so they addressed then that need to be free and to break free from the change. And they took action continuously against that bondage. And if you read historically, if we read it, we understand that. So then you get to the revival period, where the church is again reinvented itself. It's going back and reclaiming those African traditions, culture, and belief systems that also gave rise to independent Black churches, separate and apart from white churches, where it opened up the pathway to create many centers, to become centers, if you will, of educational achievement, racial uplift, and creation of benevolent and mutual aid societies, like the Free African Society, that clearly looked at what's going on in the streets. How do we attend to what Black folks need every day? And it's not just about spirituality. It's like, how does that translate beyond the walls of the church? In the Reconstruction era, we saw the birth of the Black clerical politician that created this paradigm of what it means to be a bivocational preacher. And it also ushered in the presence of Black folks in the state houses and in Congress to address like the racial injustice. The creation of the nominational networks became in place, where there were places for us to have respite and resources available. Then the Great Migration, right, which was caused by people fleeing the fear and terror of the South, in addition to a change in economy where the Industrial Revolution started to take place, and how those churches had to adjust to this influx of folks coming up from the South, and how they changed their churches to offer job programs, food, clothes, shelter, and policy issues up north to address those needs of people. And then, of course, the modern day civil rights movement we all are probably more familiar with, in terms of how the Black church was the central location, right? Using our buildings that we owned and controlled to amass political power, to organize and mobilize people to break the back of Jim Crow segregation through direct action and public policy, and the creation of institutions that were grounded in a work of justice and equity. Now, as Pastor Magruder pointed out, and I'm saying all this understanding this is not pure. understanding that it was hierarchical, it was patriarchal, it was male centered, and women who did most of the work were relegated to the margin. So I'm saying all this fully understanding that the church is not pure, right? But the church has made, and if not for the woman, not for the women, a lot of this may not have happened. So I think it's critical just to ground our work in these historical moments, because we are indeed our ancestors who stood tall, engaged in direct action, up and against systems and institutions in a form of physical and structural violence that we do not quite find ourselves up against. We have physical and structural violence, but the way in which they had to deal with that is different. But that did not stop their quest for justice, peace, love, liberation, and healing. And we continue that work. So I always say, we are our ancestors, because I can tell you this, when I go into corporate suites or when I go into the streets, I'll take Harriet. I'll take Nat Turner. I'll take Denmark Vesey, Fanny, Ida, Queen Nanny of the Maroons, Jean-Jacques Dessalines from the Haiti Revolution, Jarena Lee, Virginia Broden. I'll take them with me any day, and many others, right, into those streets to say, take your literal and your metaphorical knee off of our necks. So for me, I think it's always important for us as we do this work, generations to come, you have to have a transference of that knowledge and history, because it's important to go back and fetch what was behind us, because it also can lead us to where we're going. And I think it's Dr. Wright who quoted Cornel West to say, if you don't know your roots, then you're not going to know your roots. And so I think that's just a part of what we have to do. And that's part of who we are. And that's part of our being. And it can inform us how we look at these different iterations, right? So Brian Stevenson, for example, from enslavement to mass incarceration, in that museum in Montgomery, he's showing the different iterations over the centuries of how slavery did not end, it just transformed. So how do we look at history to see what are we viewing today and then how we might address that? So for me, that's important to kind of talk about that, because here it is, freedom is a constant struggle. When King did his last speech and talked about the nation was sick, trouble in the land, confusion everywhere, but he also said, but something is happening in the world. And he goes on to list all the ways that people are having the same cry, they want to be free around the world. And it's the same here, it's the same. So he lists that. So we're seeing the same thing replicate itself today. We see it in London, we see it in Paris, we see it in Switzerland, right? Germany, South America. So the same thing is happening today. And we find ourselves, in my opinion, in a Kairos moment, a moment to do something new, to do something different, to create something new and different in our time. So for me, at least at Friendship West, that is how we should see when I talk about the work we're doing, we're just doing a continuum of what was started before us. And it's rooted in particular brand of theological worldview. So when we talk about Friendship West, the work that we do, what pushes that, what undergirds that scripturally, one is Luke 4:18. So for me, I think that is critically important for me at least, to ground the work. So the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. What is that? To free people up from the bad news of poverty and exploitation. And so he sent me to proclaim release to the captives, to recover the sight of the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So it is, as Reverend Otis Moss Jr. would say, a theological sandwich, right? So the Spirit of the Lord is on me, theological. But in between, you have everything that impacts people between Sundays that we are called to address and deal with. And that's not just the charity part of it, but it's the justice part of it. It is getting to the root cause of that problem and uprooting it where it creates the problem and create more just and equitable systems and institutions. And so I think that's one scripture we use to ground the justice work that we do. And then Micah 6:8. You know, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love, mercy, and walk humbly with your God? And Dr. Buzak does a great job at unpacking, what does it mean to walk humbly with God? It means that we are called to be in the spaces and places and with the people, whoever they are, where God is at work and where God is walking. And that means that's wherever there's a thread of hope. That means that's wherever life is threatened. That means wherever injustice is taking place, God is there. And we are called to meet God in those places, walk with those folks, believing that our social activism will link up with divine justice and that we will indeed create more, equitable systems and just systems in our communities and in our world. So some of the work that we do at Friendship West is, of course, we see ourselves as at least at Friendship West, at least, we see ourselves as certainly a part of the larger diaspora. We do not disconnect what we go through here in America with we see Black folks going through around the world, Black and brown folks around the world, and poor people around the world who are impacted by the same systems. And so that is why we have, you know, the good neighbor, which is when we go down to the border. Right. So people, why we're going to the border, we don't have room to let more people in, you know, all these reasons why we should not be engaged down at the border because we got issues right here at home. And I'm saying it's both and, right? So I'm saying we go to the border because one, people are being dehumanized, people are being dismissed. And so what does the church have to say about that? So we have to go and be in solidarity and lift our voice to be a part of it, in addition to folks that look just like us or at the border, can't cross the border. Africans who have traveled, who have left everything that's familiar to them and somehow made their way to Central America up through Mexico to try to get to America. And so that's why we're at the border. That is a entry point for people to engage in as it relates to immigration, because immigration is not just about people coming from Mexico, right? And we need to understand that as it relates to particularly Black and brown and Haitian immigrants in particular, how over centuries, there have been policies to keep them out of the country. So we need to be concerned because folks that look like us are down there, and we need to be concerned because those are everybody, all those folks are children of God, and they are fearfully and wonderfully made just like we are. So we have to lift our voice. And that's why we go to Haiti, right? We go down to Haiti and do the work that we do in Haiti because we clearly understand when they decided to be free, right? And keep the French out, they have been paying for that for centuries. But yet and still, they hold fast to who they believe, they hold fast and understanding where they come from and what they're rooted in, but they need help. So how can we not look to our brothers and sisters in Haiti and turn a blind eye to what's going on there? So that's why we're there. The Congo, the ongoing violence perpetrated against women and girls in particular has to be addressed. Because how can we fight for gender justice here and not look to the Black women Black women and girls whose bodies are no longer, they have no agency over their bodies and being subjected to all kinds of forms of violence, and having met at least 2 women from the Congo who become victims of the ongoing greed of, you know, dominating the minds to get the coltan that makes our cell phones, our computers operate. We still have an obligation to speak, give voice, to amplify the voice of those women, to say there's a more just way, right, to get coltan in the mind to make our electronics work. It does not have to be running roughshod over villages and completely pillaging women and girls in the process. So that's why we're in the Congo. That's why we are partners with, you know, Friends of the Congo. So how do we use our privilege to be a voice for them as well? And we'll talk about policy issues. And it's because Afrophobia is real. This negative attitudes and feelings towards Black folks all over the world cannot be denied. And so we have to see, how do we lift up our collective voices and not disconnect the very local from the very global? Because I remember my first trip to London, we went with some mothers to Parliament because they were going to have a one-on-one with some of the representatives there. And if it were not for the accent of the women, I could have easily been in South Dallas listening to mothers lament over their sons who have been slain in the streets or become part of the hyper incarceration. So we need to see how we connect these global dots. So that's the other work that we do at the church. We believe our work expands beyond borders. We're not contained by borders. Then it's this idea of environmental justice work that we do. So we look at Shingle Mountain right in Southeast Dallas, Flora Farms, where you have a public health crisis, where you have people in that community because of zoning, right, can have now this toxic waste dump literally next door to her home, Marsha Jackson, who I have seen her health deteriorate over the past year because she's sucking in toxic air. And so what are we doing about that? Are we sounding the alarm about that to tell the city manager, move that, take money? We're talking about defunding police. We talk about how we reimagine a complete, not how we shuffle money around, but how do we tear down the budget and build up an anti-poverty budget? And how do you deal with forms of public health crisis over in Shingle Mountain, other Shingle Mountains in South Dallas, and in the southern part of the city that exists? So that's a way to get engaged environmentally at Friendship West. How do you be a part of this movement to tear down Shingle Mountain and other Shingle Mountains here in our very own city? And then of course, you always see how, well, I think most people know how to catch on and move out when we hit the streets, because we also understand that, yes, all of what we see, even pre-COVID, the pandemic that hit us before COVID hit, all this righteous indignation and anger is justifiable. And that's why we're in the streets. So it's also important to go out and to be seen in the streets as well, right? To show that you are indeed lifting your voice, exercising your right to say this has to, and disrupting in a way that gets your attention, to let you know that we cannot keep going on as usual, like everything is fine and everything is okay. So that's another way. And of course, I think was mentioned our food justice work that we do. So of course, for me, that's anchored in, I see being able to feed yourself as an act of liberation, not being dependent on a food system that is strained, a food system that is fragile, a food system that was never designed to really support people in mass the way that we look at it. And I think COVID showed us, some of us went in grocery stores, didn't see anything in the produce section. We're like, where's the food, right? Because it has to travel. And when it travels, if it's scarce, it's going to hit some places before it hits others. So how do we also look to how to build up a food system network within our own community? So that's some work we're doing with the Black Church Food Security Network, is how do we locate our own Black farmers? We put together a widespread network. So if that happens, you know where to go find your food, and you grow it yourself and know how to feed yourself. Right. So that's another place in terms of the food justice, which also means we also advocate around food policy, around hunger as well. And of course, we're always looking for people to be engaged in the public square. How do we take our faith and go into, our elected officials' offices and have those conversations and dialogues as well? So that's from the city hall downtown to Austin to DC. And how do we intentionally engage in policy design, right, to combat those policies that intentionally or unintentionally create material inequities that are generated by structural injustice that really marginalize a lot of Black and brown communities, and really humans around the globe who we continue to suffer and see material deprivation, if not the psychological damage that it causes as well. And those that feel the brunt of hunger, homelessness, poverty, unemployment, violence, human and sex trafficking, war, and other dynamics that, adversely impact our quality of life. And so you be part of, when we go to Friendship Wednesday at the Capitol, that's the way they get engaged. And a real way coming up, we're going to be looking for our young folks to be a part of our voter engagement activities, whereby we are really looking for people who will go through the training to be election judges, to actually work the polls, so we can be present at many of our polling locations in the fall in particular, so we can make sure that everything is cool and copacetic, that people not playing games, that we are really making sure when people come to vote, they're not subjected to voter suppression activities, et cetera, et cetera. So that'll be a way for young folks to get engaged. And of course, we have our school. We've adopted our first one, Lee A. McShane Elementary School, where 98% of the students live at or below the poverty level. So how do we also look to see how we can be a support, not just to the children at Christmas time with presents, but throughout the year, and understanding what those families are dealing with and going through. And many of those families have come from war-torn countries to seek safety and security here in America. And then we have our gender justice work, which, Kara, you are involved in through the Broken Center for Gender Justice. And this really goes back to what Reverend McGruder said. So the center really is built around how do we begin to have the church move from being so hierarchical, one, in terms of just a leadership staff, but more importantly, how do we deconstruct the patriarchy and the male-centeredness and construct new models, new ways of being engaged, not just in the community, but even with each other? And how do we allow women not to be pushed to the margins? How we allow women's voices to be heard, not just, and this is not Friendship. I think we're really good about women being in positions of quote unquote power. But it is about how does the Black church respond to that? That's the issue. And that's what McGruder was saying, how many were pushed out. And Ella Baker's story is a classic story of what happened, which is why she said the Black church didn't understand mobilizing and organizing because they were too entrenched in a very patriarchal structure. So the Broken Center for Gender Justice is another way folks can get engaged and involved. So it's not only doing this real work outside the church and dealing with structures and systems that causes us to have to really be strong advocates and understand it's a marathon, not a sprint. But the work that we do is also, how do we also ask the question and find ways and conditions under which healing is possible? Because even in the middle of all of this, we still have to make sure that we are attending to our souls. And so it's also the work of justice is also about dealing with the injustice in a way that also makes us whole and healed. Because there are a lot of soul trauma that happens. We get a lot of woundedness through these systems as well. And we can't discount the psychological impact that has on people as well. So it's also engaging in work that lets us know under what conditions is healing made possible. So those are just some of the, I guess, activities, initiatives that we do at the church where people can get engaged in about. And some of them have multiple layers to it, but that's more of just a broad stroke of what we do and what we are engaged in at Friendship West, rooted and grounded in a very storied legacy we have been bequeathed that we take very seriously.
Okay. Well, thank you. So I'm hearing theological roots, I'm hearing our global issues and how exactly that looks locally. And so now that brings us to our second keynote speaker, Mrs. Mercedes Fulbright. She is currently the Texas Organizing Director for the Working Families Party, a grassroots, multiracial political party of working people coming together across our differences to make our nation work for the many, not the few. She previously worked for the Local Progress, which is a project of the Center for Public Democracy, working with community organizations and local progressive elected officials across Texas to pass progressive policy solutions at the municipal level. She is a strategist with the Electoral Justice Project, a national table with the Movement for Black Lives Matter. And she is also the former special assistant to the president at Paul Quinn College and HBCU College in Dallas, Texas, for the study and advancement of public policy, economic advancement, civic engagement, and leadership development as it relates to the African American community and Black elected officials throughout the state of Texas. And she has previously worked for young people for a program of people for the American Way Foundation in Washington, D.C. She developed a critically conscious curriculum for strategic youth leadership development training and oversaw their national civic engagement and voter mobilization campaign in North Carolina to combat voter suppression, and is also a member of Delta Sigma Theta. Hello, Mrs. Mercedes Fulbright. Thank you so much for being a part of this discussion today. Absolutely. And so if you could go into some of the work that you do.
Yeah. Hey, so that is a really long bio. I got to stop sending people that because it's so much. I want to thank y'all for inviting me. Hey, so it's day 22 of the local uprisings here in the city of Dallas. And so I want folks who are tuning in, watching, to bear with me because I am like running on fumes right now. We're having a Juneteenth celebration at City Hall in about 30 minutes. And so I'm hoping after that, I can like drink a ton of water and rest because we've been out in the streets literally every single day since George Floyd was murdered about 3 weeks ago now. But some of the work that I get to do, you name some of it, the folks who keep my lights on and who I'm doing much of my professional movement building with is Texas Working Families Party. As mentioned, they're a grassroots political party based here actually throughout the country, but we are now a state party charter here in the state of Texas. So we are working to organize the working class, labor, poor, the unorganized, queer, undocumented folks, anybody you can think of that's on the margins, and trying to create a political party of the people. And so when we talk to people about what do they believe the leadership of the Republican and Democratic Party is, for us, we're trying to create a home, an organizing home, a space for our folks to really dig in and understand not only the issues, but understand how their lived experience not only shapes how they're able to live their lives, but that they actually have the power to change that through movement building and mass base building and the work that we get to do. And so every week I get to talk to new folks about how these political parties have shaped their lives. Do they feel like it works for them? Do they believe the two-party system works for them? And most of the time you'll hear folks say that, like, no, the left isn't doing this or the right isn't doing that. And so we're trying to really build the people's party of their dreams. The Black Panthers tried to do it. We're trying to carry that legacy through the Working Families Party. And we're in about 16 states, I believe. And we're actually on a few states ballots in New York, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, and I believe Connecticut. And so folks there actually get to vote as Democrats and Working Families parties. So here in the state of Texas, we're not trying to push to be on the ballot line. We're actually trying to pull the Democrats further to the left and actually represent the experiences and dreams and hopes and visions of folks who normally don't ever get a seat at the table. And so that's the work that I get to do. And then outside of that, The work that I get to do in the streets is through an organization called BYP 100, Black Youth Project 100. It's a national membership organization of Black activists and organizers aged 18 to 35. If you're over the age of 18 or under the age of 18, you actually, or if you're over the age of 35 and under the age of 18, you have the opportunity to be a squad member. And so for us, we see our home as a home for all Black people. And our base is our 18 and 35-year-olds, because as Danielle said, the youth really are the folks who we're following, who we're leading, who are shaping our movements, who are shaping our demands. And so we move much of our work around that age demographics, understanding that our liberation is tied to folks who are Generation X, right? Our liberation is tied to folks who are under 18. And so working together to do intergenerational organizing. I wanted to show a few things that keep me hyped, that keep me restored, especially in moments where I'm like, wow, it's day 22 and we've been out in the streets every single day. So I want to do that, and then we can come back and talk about some of the more of the work that we're doing around movement building. But this video in particular, I'm gonna show two. This first video really gets me hyped. And so I wanted to show it and then give some more about who the Movement for Black Lives is that we mentioned. So that video gets me super hyped. Nuck If You Buck, I believe, is a gift that was given to us from our ancestors. I always feel the Holy Spirit when I hear it, so I don't know about y'all, but that's how I feel. And I'm gonna show one more video. And if you don't agree with that, I'm sorry, you're not living your best life. Let me see if I can get this one to show. All right. Technology is not on my side. All right, there we go.
The social contract is broken. You broke the contract when we built our wealth by our bootstraps in Tulsa, and you dropped bombs on us. When we built it in Rosewood, and you came in and you slaughtered us. You broke the contract when you killed us in the streets and didn't give a fuck. I'm a social studies teacher, and I'm raising a Black son in America, so I have no choice but to fight and walk. The government gave $1,200 to people to survive on in March. What you thought was going to happen? And they are lucky that what Black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
So the Movement for Black Lives, as mentioned, I'm a political strategist with the Electoral Justice Project. We are a political home within the Movement for Black Lives for folks who want to focus on protecting democracy, not only federally, but locally, as well as training Black organizers to be campaign managers, to run our own campaigns, right? And to get our folks into office and to keep them in those seats. While understanding that identity politics is not Black liberation. And so when we talk about training up our folks to not only manage these campaigns, but run for office, but for folks who actually understand what we mean when we talk about systemic racism, when we talk about defunding the police, and that not meaning police reforms, what it actually means is defunding the police to the point where community control has the power, and we have the money and the resources to create the safety that we've been creating outside of policing. And so the Movement for Black Lives this weekend is holding a Juneteenth Week of Action, as I mentioned, today at City Hall at 1 p.m. As a coalition that BYP 100 is a part of called In Defense of Black Lives Dallas. And so they're holding a rally in March that starts at 1 p.m. if folks want to head out there after this Zoom panel. But all across the country, there's over 200 plus events that are happening in the name of Juneteenth, in the name of Black liberation. And so when we talk about movement building, for folks who may be new to that term, we're talking about bringing the unorganized into our homes, into our organizations. And so for BYP 100, we started in 2013 in the city of Chicago, and we now have about 10 chapters. Dallas is actually the latest chapter that has launched. We launched this past December and have hit the streets running. Much of the work that we do, well, not much, all of the work that we do is through a Black queer feminist lens. What that means is that we take the folks who are on the margins and bring them to the center. We follow their lead. So we follow trans women, we follow femmes, we follow gender nonconforming folks, women. And with that, we know that bringing folks closer to the center that are on the margins, we actually can achieve liberation. Understanding that the rise of Black trans women being murdered, we know that there's an intervention that needs to be had. There needs to be a quick, urgent, necessary intervention to protect trans women. And I understand that in order to protect them, I have to listen to them and I have to follow them. And so folks that are in our leadership in our organization are folks who are protecting each other, their trans sisters, and creating safe housing like the House of Rebirth here in Dallas, which is the only and first trans shelter, safe housing in this city. When we talk about defunding the police, we've been fighting for over a year now publicly to get the city to create safe trans housing for our folks, right? When we think about the murders that have happened in the city, it's usually been women, trans women who have been having to take to the streets to survive, right? To do sex work and end up in harm's way when it comes to men, right. This heterosexual men. And so we know that if there's interventions like actually creating safe housing for them and giving them good quality jobs, livable wages, then the rise of transgender murders wouldn't be happening. And so I take my cues from them, and that's how we lead and organize in BYP 100. The movement for Black Lives, as I mentioned, across the country are holding these different events. And so we have comrades in Detroit, St. Louis, and Miami, New York turning up. That first video you saw with Nuck If You Buck talks about how global we are. So we have comrades in Brazil right now turning up in the name of Juneteenth, which I think is special for us as Black Texans, right? We don't learn about Juneteenth growing up, but in BYP, for us, rigorous study is extremely important to our organizing practice and how we move through the world. And so we bring in folks who I would say traditionally are folks who are displaced and not listened to. And so when you look at the leadership of our organization, it is mostly women, it is mostly trans folks, it's mostly GNC folks. And we take time outside of taking to the streets, but to learn about our forefathers and foremothers who came before us so that we can understand some of the missteps that they had and also some of the successes and wins and how can we build upon that. Movement building for us isn't about activism and isn't about advocacy. It's actually being in a political home, being in an organization where you are poured into, where you are heard and listened, where you get to have principled struggle and have disagreement with civil discourse, right? And unlearning much of the socialization that white supremacy has taught us since birth. And so I will say, as a member who's been a member for the last 5 years, I've learned so much, not only about myself, but about Black liberation and what it takes for us to get there. And for me, as someone who has grown in my activism and is now, I would say, a more principled, grounded community organizer, I recognize that when I get the mic, when I get a platform like this, that I can't continue to tell lies to my community about what Black liberation actually looks like. And Black liberation in this context of what we're experiencing today, when it comes to policing, isn't police reforms. And so our coalition in defense of Black Lives Dallas is pushing for defunding Dallas Police Department, because we recognize that every time that they get an increase in the city budget every year, that there's a divestment, there's a decrease that comes from our communities. I live in South Dallas, 75215, and I know every time that they've increased the police budget, that they've taken something away from this community, either from public education to housing, to mental health facilities, to affordable, healthy grocery stores. And for us, like, the time has to stop. Like, this actually has to stop because my folks are hurting. I'm actually tired of having to, run from my living room to my bedroom because gunshots are happening down the streets because our folks are fighting over resources that they could have had years ago, right? And so there are demands around defund the police, and what you're hearing across the country through the movement for Black Lives is about investing in communities, is about investing in people, it's about investing in kids. And for many people, they find that as a hard concept. But when you look at the budget, every year that the police budget goes up, the investment in people's lives goes down, the quality of life in people's lives go down. A lot of folks will say, well, how do you see a community like South Dallas with not enough police officers in the street? And I'm like, oh, have you been to the suburbs? Like, they have everything that they need funded, and police aren't patrolling and harassing their folks, right? And so for us, it's not to be that we want to be like the suburbs. We acknowledge and recognize that when things are fully funded and people are invested in, then you actually have the freedom to thrive. And for my experience of my life and the things that I experienced, many of my folks have had to fight to survive. And we're saying that we don't need any barriers. We don't want to interact with the police in ways that escalate just because, I don't know, in police mind, when they look at Black and brown people in our bodies, we are uncivil people that must be controlled. And for us, we have the agency, we have the autonomy, we know our community, we know our neighbors. And so we're fighting for a radical transformation, not only to happen in this city, but across the country. So to know that there are millions of people that are taking up into the streets, and also acknowledging that all 50 states have actually participated in some sort of protest and action since George Floyd was murdered, says a lot about where our movement is going. And so the Movement for Black Lives is an ecosystem of about 100 plus Black-led organizations across the country, across this globe, who are coming together around these demands around divesting from police and investing in community health and safety measures, fighting for us to demand these systems to end the war on Black people, demanding that they free our people from cages because of petty crimes like marijuana that now is legalized and white people are making billions of dollars off of, right? We understand these things, and we're telling these systems in America, white supremacists, to stop gaslighting us, right? To stop telling us that the things that we say are happening to us aren't true, isn't real, when it's being caught on camera every single day, right? And so I invite folks who are new to movement to find a political home, to find an organizing home. BYP 100 locally in your city can be that for you. We take healing and safety very seriously. So this weekend, I'm going to rest. I'm going to hydrate. We're going to have a healing circle this Sunday for our members so that we can get restored, because our folks have been out in the streets every day. But understand that when we talk about movement building, it is about being in community with folks who are willing to take the charge, to take the baton from our foremothers and forefathers and lead this fight towards Black liberation. And you cannot do that by yourself. We are taking on a violent, terrorist, white supremacist institution, and it requires you to be in community with folks who are gonna have your back when you go to these protests in these streets. Don't ever go to a protest by yourself, even if they say they're peaceful. They may not always be, because as you can see, if you're watching these videos, police is inciting violence and instigating the violence that's happening in the streets, but also recognize that there are plenty of organizations across the city that you can join and be a part of, and to deepen your understanding about how we got here. What about the history of policing? I could do a whole thing around history of policing, but we're not going to do that in this space. But how anti-Blackness and capitalism has caused much of the turmoil and systemic racism that we're experiencing as Black people, right? Providing plenty of political education that our folks need.
So what are some of those books and podcasts and channels that
yeah. So I think the best one right now, and it's you can Google it. I'm hearing that it's all over the internet for free, but Angela Davis, Our Prisons Obsolete, is a really great start. I read that book years ago, and I'm starting to now more understand what she meant when she said our prisons obsolete, and it includes policing. She talks about the prison industrial complex and the need for us to abolish it. She's been fighting for that since she was in a cage, right? What else? There's a podcast, I think it's called Hella Black. It's these two Black men who bring on different organizers. They had No Name on there a couple of months ago. And then there's this really great conversation about the prison industrial complex. So if you want to understand more about these demands around defunding the police, that's a really great start. I think everyone should read Assata Shakur's book, autobiography about herself. It says so much about what we're experiencing. To know that she was my age, experiencing what I'm experiencing today, just puts in perspective to what we're fighting, and that this is a marathon and not a sprint. James Baldwin, always, the fire next time. I am just trying to think of everything.
So I have a question as well. For someone who might not be traditionally religious or attend church, what is the role, from that perspective, what is the role that the Black church could possibly play when it comes to social justice organizing?
Yeah. So, I had this conversation privately with some Black clergymen and pastors a week ago or so. But, my charge to them was that if they read the books that came before them or watched the documentaries, the church was always a place of restoration and security and a safe house for organizers, especially young people. I appreciated Danielle naming that Martin Luther King was 26 when he first led the Montgomery bus boycott, and to know that he was able to lead something that massive for that long. I know the Black church was involved in that because our folks needed to be fed, our folks needed to coordinate, our folks needed to meet, right? And so when I think about the Black church in this moment, it is absolutely a safe house for our folks. Harriet Tubman has safe houses as she was trying to get her folks free. And so I believe that the Black church should be playing an integral role in being that for us. They should have police-free church, right? Like where we should be able to show up in safety and know that the police will not be there. Any forms of law enforcement will be there where we can get restored. I came on the call saying that it's day 22. Our folks are tired, and it's going to take more than words of inspiration for us to want to get back out to the street. We need to be hydrated, right? We need to be held. We need to cry, right? Like I finally cried after 3 weeks of being out here, and be able to have that like safety and security, knowing that like our folks see us, and that, what we're doing feels supernatural in many ways. And when I think about the church, I think about that, and that we are serving and following a God who is omnipotent. And sometimes we need that reminder in physical ways, and ways that say, here is a home for you, actually. When I talk about a political home and organizing home, that is what BYP is for so many people across this country, is that we get to pour back into our folks, right? And train them up, feed them, literally and figuratively, right? And I think that's the role that the Black church should be playing. And that needs to happen ASAP, because our folks aren't slowing down. And I think it's important that people see that and want to intervene to help.
Okay. And I know we have probably like 6 or 7 minutes left, but it can be from Reverend DA, it can be from Mercedes or McGruder. I am curious to know, what is the difference, specifically for my generation, what is the difference between community organizing and protest, or are they one and the same? Is there a difference?
I was just going to add to that, Mercedes or DA, if y'all could also help us add this to that, protest, community organizing versus movement building. Like what's the, help us maybe distinguish those pieces too.
Yeah, so protest in general, I would say, is a form of action, right? And so what you'll see right now is a lot of folks who have either never been to a protest, never organized, haven't done anything besides like maybe tweet something out. And so the biggest difference with that is that you get to show up to a thing and then go back home, right? So you're not contributing to the long game, is how I would phrase it. It's important that we have like physical bodies out at these events, but the real work actually happens when we're off of the streets and we're at the kitchen table and we're plotting, right? And we're doing the strategy and we're power mapping and figuring out what our campaign is for the next 6 months to a year. Community organizing is like talking to the people, right? It is organizing your folks. It's also being the facilitator and helping to I wouldn't say enlighten or empower, because we're not here to save our folks. I know our folks know how to save themselves, but for us to like almost be like a container for our folks to like be able to harness their anger, their frustration, their questions in a way that can be turned into action. And then the movement building piece is what we talked about earlier, is giving the unorganized and the folks that the community organizers are bringing together into a movement, right? And what you're seeing right now with the Movement for Black Lives this weekend is a part of movement building. There are over 200 plus people who may not have an organization or political home, but they now see the Movement for Black Lives as a place that's going to amplify their voice, that's going to amplify what they're doing. And then hopefully from that, they're either going to want to start their own thing, or they're going to find something in their own community and build upon what they did this weekend. So this is just like the beginning for many folks this weekend. I know 200 plus people are not community organizers who were putting this up. And the exciting part is they now are. Like they put on an event this weekend and you're now a community organizer. You brought all your people out to whatever event you did. You probably talked about, you know, your demands. You probably talked about the issues that are happening in your community. And now you get to take that beyond Sunday. And that's a part of movement building, because you brought maybe hundreds, thousands, it could be 2 people. But as you continue to bring folks into your org, into your work, that's a part of movement building. And we need masses of people to sustain what we're doing right now. And it's important for folks to remember that.
All right. Rev DA or Pastor McGruder?
It's not much more for me to add. I think Mercedes, you know, very succinctly, you know, really nuanced it for us. And I would just, and she may have said this, for me, when I think of movement building, for me at least, when I think of movement building, it's also about creating an infrastructure. Because for me, it's also about like sustainability, how you are able to sustain the work that you're going after and having the infrastructure in place to do that. Because for me, it's when I'm long gone from here, is something still standing for the next generation, and to take that and elevate that to another level and continue to do the work. So that may have been what she said, but it's not more for me to add, but that's, I'm just real big on that. What infrastructure do we have in place that can survive personalities and people?
Yes, that is.
That has been, I would say, if I had to say, has been a problematic with the Black church in particular, is that we could be very pulpit driven and personality driven. Mm-hmm. And so when King, and I say this, when King was shot, we know they had more than one bullet in the gun, right? So it's something about how they felt. If they were able to eliminate King, the movement would fall. Mm-hmm. And it did, right? So it is, how do we build the infrastructure where I think the leadership becomes more decentralized, and where you have multiple people who are quote unquote leaders, who give voice, who help build that, so that people can plug in as one goes away. And I think that is what we have to just think in terms of Black community, period. Wherever you do the work, think about what are you putting in place that can survive you, and it can work, can continue long after you're gone.
That's
so
it.
The only additional thing I would add. And I also would say to Mercedes as well, what she added about what can the Black church do now to be that place of refuge, respite, to recover. But it's also the place of the church to be out in the streets too. It's not just, you know, we're also called to be right there and to use our places and points of privilege, right, to amplify voice of those who are marginalized. Because the reality is we were marginalized and we still are. And I think that's where we get confused and thinking that we're free.
Yeah.
Right. Because obligation, responsibility, not only be that place where people can come and get refuge, get revived, but it's also how we go out and be a part of that movement as well.
There's a place for everyone in this movement.
Yes, yes.
Everyone.
Yes.
And I know, Mercedes, was there a video you wanted to last?
Yeah, I just wanted to close this out with this and hear whatever you think. But this video was actually one of our actions. We did a week of action 1 week after George Floyd was murdered, and wanted to be sure to uplift Breonna Taylor. As I mentioned, center trans women, femmes, GNC folks. And so for us, say her name is extremely important to us. And so we celebrated Breonna Taylor's birthday by this action on the day. This is 75, Highway 75.
That,
Shut down the highway for
Amen.
yes. Yeah, in the streets. Yeah. Pastor McGruder, did you want to close us up, all of us?
Well, thank you so much. This has been tremendous. So thank you, Mercedes. Thank you so much for your insight. Thank you, Pastor Ayers, as well. I've learned so much. In order to help, we've got to learn how to listen. There's space for all of us, for each of us, right, in this movement. We've all got to find a local organizing home. Mercedes gave some awesome resources for that. Thank you, Pastor DA, for laying out the work that Friendship West is already doing. And so our hope is that we can also be an organizing home, a safe space, both an organizing home and a safe space, a safe house for those who are doing the work. And then I think the most powerful component for me is this reminder that if we're going to do the work, we got to do the work in community. And that does require us a sort of a murder of the ego, right? That crucifying of the flesh, as it were, crucifying of the ego daily, particularly in our Black religious spaces. So this has been a tremendous experience. We're going to do this again. Mercedes, come back. We want to expand that conversation. I know you got to get to your rally today, but I do want us to come back. Let's have a conversation about the history of policing. Connect with the Tribe Ministry for our young adult community. Connect with the Tribe. Thank you, Kiara. Shout out to you for just being you and all of your work today. Connect with the Tribe, our young adult ministry. Connect with Chosen, our youth ministry, 6th through 12th grade, as well as our collegiate, and then Justice. That's all we do at Friendship West. So we want to make sure you connect with the Justice Ministry led by Pastor Ayers. BYP 100 Dallas. Make sure that you connect with them. Learn and grow. We're all learning and we're all growing together. All hearts and minds are clear. Let me give you this benediction of this blessing. Let us go in peace to serve one another. Let us go in power to make the kingdom come. Let us go forth in grace for one another, to do justice, to love mercy, and walk humbly with God. Ashe. Amen. Y'all have a great rest of your weekend. Happy Juneteenth, everybody. Peace, family.
Bye.